Hello! Welcome to class. Today we're talking about the second chapter of group dynamics. We're going to go over the level of analysis debate, research methods, data collection, and some theoretical perspectives. But before we get into it, let me cover my bases. All of the information I'm talking about is pulled from this textbook, right? And from lectures by Dr. Campbell at Shippensburg University. I also want to stress that I am no expert, okay? This is just my stand-up comedy routine. I think that's everything. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Levels of analysis debate. The scientific field of group dynamics was not established by a single theorist or researcher who laid down some clear-cut set of assumptions or principles. Nah, group dynamics resulted from group processes. These group processes shaped the field's paradigm. Now, a paradigm is just scientists' shared assumptions about the phenomena that they study, basically a set of research procedures. The paradigm determines the questions that researchers consider worth studying, using the methods that are most appropriate. The dynamics of groups is a critical concern for all social sciences. In his book, The Psychology of Crowds, this guy named Gustave Le Bon concluded that individuals are transformed when they join a group. Wilhelm Wundt also published Group Psychology, which combined elements of anthropology and psychology by examining the conditions and changes displayed by social aggregates. But wait, there's more. Willie also examined how groups influence members' cognitive and perceptual processes. The level of analysis is the focus of study when examining a multi-level process or phenomenon, like the individual level or the group level of analysis. The individual level of analysis focuses on individuals who make up the group. Floyd Allport chose the individual as his unit of analysis instead of the group because Allport believed that the actions of all are nothing more than the sum of the actions of each taken separately. Basically, Allport said that all we need to do is focus on individuals. So by Allport's logic, if we have a group of 4 people, then we can study each single person and average them together to understand the group as a whole. This logic is captured in Floyd Allport's group fallacy, which the textbook says goes a little something like this: explaining social phenomena in terms of the group as a whole, instead of basing the explanation of the individual level processes within the group, ascribing psychological qualities like will, intentionality, and mind to a group rather than to the individuals within the group. Boy, that's a lot. TLDR, Allport championed the idea that groups are nothing more than the sum of their parts. However, this is an outdated belief. Psychologists back in the day used to think that groups were nothing special, right? They thought that the group was just the sum of its parts. But we know better now. The group level of analysis goes a little something like this. Groups are actually more than the sum of their parts. Groups cannot be fully understood simply by examining individual members. For example, if you take a group of all-star basketball players and put them together, they might be really bad as a group. But on the flip side, you could create a group of average players, and by bringing them together, they may do really well. And here we introduce the concept of group mind, or collective consciousness. Now, this is hypothetical stuff, so fair warning. Collective consciousness, or group mind, is a hypothetical, unifying mental force linking group members together. The fusion of individual consciousness into a single, whole consciousness. Fun fact, right? Researchers who preferred to study individuals, like Allport, and not groups, were actually willing to concede that group members often do act as if they are of one mind. They all respond very similarly. But these researchers, like Allport, rejected the idea that group members shared a single conscious mental state. And, for good reason. Allport's rejection of group mind helped ensure the scientific status of group dynamics. Researchers have never found any evidence that group members are linked by some psychic, telepathic connection that creates a single mind. Although that would be pretty cool. But on that note, right, some group-level concepts are not unreasonable. And one of those concepts is norms. The idea that a norm is more than just the sum of the individual beliefs of all members was verified by Muzafer Sharif in 1936. Every member of the group under study changed their behavior until it matched the group's norms. The norms exist at the group level rather than at the individual level. We have moved towards a group level of analysis, recognizing that there is something extra that happens when you put people into groups. We cannot reduce groups to their individual attributes because we must think about what happens when you bring people together, like cohesion. Nowadays, we try to get at the hidden dynamics of groups instead of just focusing on the individual traits of its members. And to this point, let me introduce you to this guy, all right? Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin was very much the opposite of Floyd Allport. Okay, Lewin came up with field theory, which is premised on the principle of interactionism, basically assuming that the actions, processes, and responses of people in groups, aka behavior, are determined by the interaction of the person and the environment. TLDR, behavior is a function of the person with their own personal traits and the environment. The formula B equals F parentheses P comma E close parentheses summarizes this assumption. And yes, I just read that formula out loud. The law of interactionism states that each person's behavior, B, is a function of their personal qualities, P, the social environment, E, and the interaction of these personal qualities with factors present in the social environment. Again, so proposed Lewin, anyway. Lewin believed that a group is a unified system with emergent properties that cannot be fully understood by piecemeal examination. Okay, adopting the Gestalt mantra of the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, Lewin maintained that when individuals merged into a group, something new was created, right? And this new product had to be the object of study. Behavior is a function of the interaction of personal traits and environmental factors, as we see with group norms. So when you study groups, you have a choice. You can focus only on the individuals who make up the group, or you could focus on individual traits and environmental factors. Or you could even go a step further in a multi-level analysis. A multi-level analysis is all about examining groups from the individual, group, and organizational or societal levels, taking all three factors into consideration. The multi-level perspective recognizes that a complete explanation of group processes and phenomena requires multiple levels of analysis, including individual level, group level, and organizational or societal level. And that goes individual level is micro, group level is meso, and organizational or societal level is macro. Micro level factors include the qualities, characteristics, and actions of the individual members. Meso-level factors are group-level qualities of the groups themselves, like their cohesiveness, their size, their composition, and their structure. Macro-level factors, then, are the qualities and processes of the larger collectives that enfold the group, like communities, organizations, or societies. Again, that's three options, okay? An individual level of analysis, a group level of analysis, or a multi-level analysis. If you want the best picture, go with the multi-level. Real quick, I want to talk about measurement in group dynamics, just kind of a broad statement on this. Studying groups is like putting groups under a microscope and changing or altering the magnification of that microscope. You look at behaviors, reactions, the exchange of effects, etc. And this all leads us to testing hypotheses, okay? Once researchers have collected their data, they must use that information to test hypotheses about group phenomena. Research designs are studies that are conducted to observe, explain, and predict group behavior. You must decide what type of research design you want to use, because this will influence the method that you use to describe, explain, and predict behavior. One of the most common research methods is the case study. It is a research technique that draws on multiple sources of information to examine, in depth, the activities and dynamics of a group or groups. Now, the case study is basic in concept, but it requires a ton of time and effort, and also money. So, in other words, the case studies are in-depth examinations of single bona fide groups via observation, interviews, archival documents, etc. A quick note on this here, a bona fide group is a pre-existing group that the researcher finds in the world. Naturally occurring groups, like audiences, boards of directors, clubs, or teams. The point is that the researcher does not make this group, it simply already exists. Fun fact, the opposite of a bona fide group is an ad hoc group, which is created for research purposes. Reality shows run kind of like case studies. Okay, this one's kind of funny. They follow a person or a group of people over an extended period of time. Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Case studies give you a wealth of information, but you cannot generalize your findings to other groups because one group is not identical to another. So, limits of case studies, if I had to put them all together, I would say generalizability, time, and cost, because case studies take a while to do, and they can be expensive. Okay. Observation. Observation is a measurement method that involves watching and recording the activities of individuals and groups. You are simply watching and recording, okay? You are not going as in-depth as you would in a case study. For example, think of watching a group of monkeys in the wild. There are different ways to observe your subjects. And here we talk about overt, covert, and participant observations. Kicking it off with overt, okay? Overt observation entails openly watching and recording information with no attempt to conceal your research purposes. With this, you're very open about what you're doing. You're walking up and you're like, hey, I'm going to watch you. Covert observation entails watching and recording information on the activities of individuals and groups without their knowledge. And see, this is the point here. You got to be sneaky. Finally, we have participant observation. Participant observation entails watching and recording group activities as a member of the group or a participant in the social process. So think about wanting to observe fraternity life, so you actually go and join a frat. That's the essence of participant observation. And here we talk about William White. Okay, this sociologist, William White, joined a street corner gang in the 1940s. Okay, he joined the Nortons. He joined the Nortons and told them up front that he would be studying their behavior for his book, Street Corner Society. White's experience with the gang was very positive. Did his bias influence the results? Maybe. Fun fact, White took a more qualitative, unstructured approach because he was more interested in gaining an understanding of the entire community and its citizens. His research was more exploratory, designed to develop theory first and validate hypotheses second. So White used an unstructured observational approach. And to this point, I say that observations yield qualitative data, meaning that you do not get numbers like frequencies or percentages, but instead you wind up with narratives and descriptive data. So not numeric, but more thematic. And of course, narratives are subjective. If you run an overt observation, this is where you're very upfront about what you're doing, you face the risk of groups changing their behavior because they know that they are being watched by a researcher. But a covert observation also has its downsides because it can be dangerous to be caught. Covert observations may also be unethical by you violating informed consent. See, generally you have to let people know that you're watching and recording them unless it's a public space. So covert observations have safety concerns and ethical or privacy concerns. Even with that in mind, okay, most researchers do still use covert observations because of the Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect is a change in behavior that occurs when individuals know that they're being watched. And basically, we do not act like ourselves when we know that we're being watched. To this point, the longer that White was with his gang, the less on guard they became. Fun fact, an online group, or e-group, is two or more individuals who interact with each other solely or primarily through computer-based information technologies. Basically, email, instant messaging, social media, instead of through face-to-face interaction. So if those are the unstructured observational methods, then of course you know we gotta talk about the structured ones. Structured observational methods are research procedures that create a systematic record of group interaction and activities by classifying or coding each overt expression or action into a defined category. It's way too warm for a jacket. Structured observational methods offer researchers a way to increase the subjectivity of their observations. Researchers who use structured observational methods classify each group behavior into an objectively definable category. First, researchers decide which behaviors they will track. Then, they develop unambiguous descriptions of each type of behavior that they want to code. Next, using these behavioral definitions as a guide, researchers note the occurrence and frequency of all targeted behaviors that they see when they watch the group. Structured observations let you define ahead of time what you're looking for, so you know exactly what each behavior means. It's more structured, it's more rigid. So TLDR, structured observational methods are quantitative research procedures that collect and analyze numeric data, like frequencies, proportions, and amounts. So, structured, quantitative, unstructured, qualitative. Robert Bales developed two of the best known structured coding systems for studying groups. Okay, these include the Interaction Process Analysis, or IPA, and his newest, Systematic Multiple Level Observation of Groups, SimLog. Let's start with the IPA. Okay, the IPA is a structured coding system used to measure group activity by classifying each observed behavior into one of two categories, like shows solidarity or asks for orientation, stuff like that. The IPA breaks behavior down into the 12 things that you are looking for, and these are all predefined so you know exactly what to expect. The IPA classifies behavior into 6 task behavior and 6 relationship behavior categories. Again, 6 task behavior and 6 relationship behavior. Areas 1 through 3 and 10 through 12 are used to code socio-emotional or relationship interactions. Areas 4 through 6 and 7 through 9 are used to code task interaction. The IPA also accounts for problems of orientation, evaluation, control, decision, tension management, and integration. And yes, that's a lot. I don't think you'll have to remember it, I hope. The newer SimLog generates more global summaries of group behavior. Okay, the SimLog is a theoretical and structured coding system for recording the activities of a group and the overall behavioral orientation of its members. SimLog coders, these poor souls, they use 26 different categories instead of only 12. It is a revised IPA that is based on 3 dimensions. Those being categories that signal members' dominance, submissiveness, okay, there's 1, friendliness, unfriendliness, there's 2, and accepting, opposing the task of... And accepting, opposing the task orientation of established authority. So, 3 dimensions, 26 different categories, that's the SimLog. Structured observations are more valid and more reliable than case studies and unstructured qualitative observations. Valid meaning that what the data reveals is actually what happened, and reliable meaning that other people could do the exact same thing and come away with the exact same interpretation. And this is the essence of replicability. I want to do what you do, and I want to get the exact same result. Reliability is a measure's consistency across time, components, and raters. For example, if a rater classifies the same statement the same way every time they hear it, then the rating is reliable. Inter-rater reliability is the degree to which 2 or more raters agree. Like, for example, if different raters working independently all code the statement similarly, then the rating has inter-rater reliability. Validity, then, is the degree to which a measurement method assesses what it was designed to measure. The IPA, for example, is valid only if observers' ratings actually measure the amount of relationship and task interaction in the group. If the observers are incorrect in their coding, or if the categories are not accurate indicators of the relationship and task interaction, then the scores are not valid. Let's talk about self-reports. Self-report measures are all based on a simple premise. If you want to know what a group member is thinking, feeling, or planning, then just ask them to report that information to you directly. Interviews, okay? The researcher records the respondent's answers to various questions. Interviews are different from questionnaires. In questionnaires, the respondent records their answers themselves. So, interviews, the researcher records what the respondent says. Questionnaires, the respondent records their answers they own damn self. Fun fact, when the items are selected and pre-tested for accuracy, a multi-level measure is usually called a test, or a scale. TLDR, self-report measures are all about asking participants to express their feelings and attitudes via interviews, surveys, or tests. Note, okay, self-reports are quicker and cheaper than both ordinary observations and structured observations. However, a major issue here is that people may not be honest in their report. Self-reports introduce participant bias and subjectivity. Unstructured observations introduce researcher bias and subjectivity. A concept related to this is sociometry. Sociometry is a method for measuring the relationships among members of a group and summarizing those relationships graphically. This was developed by psychiatrist Jacob Moreno. A researcher begins a sociometric study by asking group members one or more questions about the other members. Researchers often limit the number of choices that participants can make when they do this. These choices are then organized into a sociogram. A sociogram is just a graphic representation of the patterns of inter-member relations created through sociometry. In most cases, each member of the group is depicted by a symbol, like a lettered circle or square, and the relations among members are indicated by lines from one member to another. So, think of one of those crazy conspiracy webs, right? With all the lines coming together, all the dots there. Yeah, that's basically a sociogram, which again, very important to sociometry. Researchers can employ sociometry with self-reports. Reports can give us unique insight into relations between group members that are not always visible. Okay, I want to talk about the social network analysis, or SNA. Social network analysis is a set of procedures for studying the relational structure of groups and networks mathematically and graphically. And I know how much you love math. Using information about the relationships linking members, the method yields member-level indexes and a graphic representation of the unit. Fun fact, sociometry was an early form of social network analysis. So you see, it's all kind of connected. Social network analysis yields information about individual members, relationships between pairs of members, and the group's overall structure. Social network analysis also yields information about cliques, hierarchies, and other relational regularities and oddities in the overall organization of a group. Whew, almost ran out of breath. Reliability and validity of self-report measures. Yes, we're talking about that now. Self-report methods have weaknesses and strengths. Okay, this is related to sociometry. For one, self-report methods depend heavily on knowing what questions to ask the group members. And for another, a maze of technical questions confronts the researcher designing the questionnaires. If respondents do not answer the questions consistently, then their responses are unreliable. If questions are not worded properly, the instrument will lack validity because the respondents may misinterpret what is being asked. Validity is also a problem if group members are unwilling to disclose their personal attitudes, feelings, and perceptions, or they may just be unaware of these internal processes. Despite these limitations, self-reports do provide a lot of information about group phenomena from the perspective of the participant instead of the observer. When researchers are primarily interested in personal processes like perceptions, feelings, and beliefs, self-reports may be the only means of assessing these private processes. So, they're unreliable, but if you want to get at what someone's feeling, they're all you got. However, if the participant is biased, then their self-report may not be as accurate as we would like it to be. And again, there's that issue of bias. Self-reports may also not be accurate indicators of group-level processes or psychological/physiological processes that people are either not aware of or not able to accurately assess. You have to be willing to disclose it, and you have to know that it actually exists. If you don't, then odds are you can't make a report, or you won't make a report, depending. Bill Nye the Science Guy. Now we're talking about experiments. An experiment is a research design in which the investigator, 1, manipulates at least one variable by randomly assigning participants to 2 or more different conditions, 2, measures at least one other variable, and 3, controls the influence of other variables on the outcome. The independent variable is the thing that the researcher changes in an experimental study. The researcher will manipulate the independent variable while measuring the dependent variable. Manipulate the independent variable, measure the dependent variable. The dependent variable is the resultant outcomes measured by the researcher, or basically the effect variable in a cause-effect relationship. So altogether, experimental research is basically just laboratory simulations that test cause and effect relationships. It's all about manipulating one or two variables to see their impact on another variable. The independent variable, IV, is the factor that is manipulated or altered by the researcher. The dependent variable, DV, is the variable that is measured. Note, Experiments are set apart from other research techniques because you actually manipulate something in an experiment. But on that note, we gotta also remember that experimenters must maintain control over other variables. Experimental control just means eliminating potential confounding variables, like pre-existing differences. You want a clean, controlled experiment, okay? No outside confounds influencing the result, no interfering factors. This is why we have random assignment, okay? Random assignment is just assigning participants randomly to the conditions of the independent variable. Random assignment equalizes the groups and reduces potential bias. So altogether, okay, we have an independent variable, we have a dependent variable, and we have random assignment. These are the cornerstones of experimental research. If you don't randomly assign, you lose experimental control. So real quick, let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of experiments. When the experiment is properly designed and conducted, researchers can make inferences about the causal relationships that link variables. So if everything is constant except for the independent variable that they manipulate, and then the dependent variable changes, it's reasonable to assume that the independent variable, right, led to a change in the dependent variable. So experiments offer an excellent means of testing hypotheses about the causes of group behavior. But they have problems with logic, methods, and ethics. For one, researchers cannot always control the situation sufficiently to manipulate the independent variable or to keep other variables constant. Researchers may end up studying groups that are too artificial to be found in the real world because the lab is a very tightly controlled setting. Also, the use of deception can be problematic on an ethical level. On that note, I want to mention that experiments can be conducted in the field, but they will almost always involve sacrificing some degree of control, which will then reduce the strength of the researcher's conclusions. Now, let's talk about correlations. Correlational designs are all about examining the strength and direction of naturally occurring relationships. Fun fact, correlational studies got their name because researchers initially indexed the strength and direction of the relationships among variables that they measured by calculating correlation coefficients. A correlation coefficient is a standard statistic that measures the strength and direction of a relationship between two variables. Correlation coefficients are symbolized by lowercase italicized r, and they range from -1 to +1, with the distance from 0, or 0 being the neutral point, indicating the strength of the relationship. So, if you're at -1 and you're sat really close to -1, that is a strong negative relationship, right? The closer you get to 0, the weaker the relationship becomes. But then, once you enter the positive side of things, right, and then you start getting closer to +1, suddenly it becomes a stronger positive relationship. Positive relationship is when the variables increase or decrease together, whereas a negative relationship is where the relationship is inverse. So, as one goes up, the other goes down. That's negative. So, -1, negative. +1, positive. 0, weak or no correlation. Went on a little tangent there. I'm sorry about that. The sign of the correlation, negative or positive, indicates the direction of the relationship. Researchers do not always analyze their data by computing correlations, but the term correlational study continues to be used to describe studies that rely on measuring variables instead of manipulating them. A correlational study is a research design in which the investigator measures at least two variables and then uses statistical procedures to examine the strength and direction of the relationship between those variables. Note: sometimes we are forced into doing correlations if we are unable to do a lab experiment, because ethics may restrict you into doing correlational designs. Important, okay? When you run a correlation, you are looking for the correlation coefficient, okay? That little italicized r. The correlation coefficient is one of the basic statistics. It is a number between -1 and +1. You cannot get a number outside of -1 or +1. And I already kind of went on a tangent about this, so You get the gist. Now let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages of correlations. Okay, a strength of correlational studies is that they clearly describe the relationships without disrupting or manipulating any aspect of the group. We're just measuring the relationships, we're not actually manipulating anything. That's good. However, a limit of correlations is that they do not tell us anything about causality. There is no cause and effect here. Also, we have to beware of spurious correlations. Okay, a spurious correlation is two or more variables that are associated but not causally related, and they are associated due either to coincidence or to the presence of a third, unforeseen factor. This is stuff like people drowning being correlated with the number of movies that Nicolas Cage appears in. Coincidental, probably. Okay, steady on. We're talking about theories in group dynamics. Theories provide the means of organizing known facts about groups and creating orderly knowledge out of discrete bits of information. Theories also yield suggestions for future research. When researchers extend existing theories into new areas, they discover new information about groups, while simultaneously testing the strengths of their theories. Fun fact, researchers have actually developed hundreds of theories about groups and their dynamics. These theories share some basic assumptions about which processes are more important than others, the types of outcomes that they explain, and the variables that are most influential. TLDR. Theories organize facts and give direction for future research. Note, everything starts with a theory or some broad theoretical perspective. Some group theories even draw from other sub-disciplines in psychology. Remember, you gotta stay hydrated. Alright, motivational and emotional theories. Motivations are psychological mechanisms that give purpose and direction to behavior. Motivation, just think of wants, needs, and other psychological processes that energize behavior and thereby determine its form, intensity, and duration. And then when it comes to emotions, emotions often accompany the needs and desires of motivation. Emotion is a subjective state of positive or negative affect that is often accompanied by a degree of arousal or activation. Fun fact, the words motivation and emotion both come from the Latin word movere, meaning to move. Motivational theories suggest that groups are an excellent way for members to satisfy some of their most basic needs. And here we talk about something from Abraham Maslow. The hierarchy of needs. This is an ordering of needs from the most basic and biological to the more social and psychological, like aesthetics and actualization. Also, emotions prompt individuals to seek membership in groups instead of remaining alone, because one of the ways that people maximize their happiness is by joining with other people in groups. Shifting gears, let's talk about behavioral theories. Now, this is very much Dr. Podizak's area of expertise. So, B.F. Skinner's behaviorism was based on two key assumptions. 1. Psychological processes shape people's reactions in groups. Those processes are motives and drives. Skinner recommended examining how people behave in a specific context, rather than speculating about the psychological or interpersonal processes that may have instigated their actions. So, in other words, don't take things out of context, so said Skinner. And 2, second assumption of Skinner's behaviorism, is that most behavior is consistent with the law of effect. Okay, law of effect goes like this. Behaviors that are followed by positive consequences will occur more frequently, whereas behaviors that are followed by negative consequences will occur less often. Behaviorism is just a theoretical explanation of the way that organisms acquire new responses to environmental stimuli through conditioning, or learning. So TLDR goes something like this. Behavioral theories are all about how behaviors are learned through conditioning and reinforcement. Social exchange theories use behaviorism to explain how relationships are initiated and sustained through the reliable exchange of rewards and the imposition of stops by individuals and groups. Also, quick note here, Social exchange theory is an economic model of interpersonal relationships that assumes that individuals seek out relationships that offer them many rewards while exacting few costs. So, you give me lots of stuff, and I ain't gotta give you too much. Shifting gears again, let's talk about systems theories. A systems theory approach assumes that groups are complex, adaptive, dynamic systems of interacting individuals. The members are the units of the system who are coupled together by relationships. Systems theory is a general theoretical approach that assumes that complex phenomena are the result of the constant and dynamic adjustments that occur between and among the interdependent parts of the whole. So when applied to groups, systems theory assumes that groups are open systems that maintain dynamic equilibrium among members through a complex series of interrelated adjustments and processes. TLDR, systems theories conceptualize groups as complex systems of interacting individuals. So just think about groups in terms of a machine model, right? Treat groups like clockwork and ask yourself how well the parts actually work together. Quick note, systems theory suggests that parts are interchangeable, right? Specific units can be swapped in and out with no discernible impact on the system. Although, sometimes a group of closely intertwined parts can change tremendously when one of their components changes. So if we have a group of assembly line workers and we replace one of those workers, the system as a whole probably isn't going to be affected too badly. But if we take a group like your family, which in this case we'll assume is you, your mother, your father, and your sister, and we replace your sister with someone else, you're probably going to notice. So taking a step back, talking about this theory in a more broad context, right? Just as a system receives inputs from the environment, processes this information internally, and then outputs its products, groups gather information, review that information, and generate products. So you can see the similarities there. Inputs are any factors that are present in the group setting. These include members' individual qualities, group level factors, and even macro level factors. So individual qualities would be skills, experience, and training. Group factors would be group structure and cohesiveness. And then the macro level stuff would be the cultural context or the organizational norms. These input factors all influence the process that takes place within the group as members interact with each other, including communication, planning, conflict, and leadership. These processes transform the inputs into outputs, including aspects of the group's performance, like products, decisions, and errors, and changes in the factors that serve as inputs to the system, also known as feedback. So that was a lot. Let's try looking at it this way. Inputs go in, activities happen inside the group generates outputs, and from those outputs come outcomes that the group must face. Shifting focus yet again, we're going to talk about cognitive perspectives. Cognitive processes are just mental processes that acquire, organize, and integrate information. These include memory systems that store data and the psychological mechanisms that process this information. Usually, group members are busy perceiving, judging, reasoning, and remembering. All of these mental activities influence their understanding of one another, the group, and themselves. The cognitive perspectives primarily focus on how groups affect the way we think about ourselves and others, and also how we relate to others and ourselves. So TLDR, cognitive theories examine the mental thought processes of group members. One example is self-categorization theory. This is all about the way that our self-identities change as we become members of different groups. Like, for example, becoming a Shippensburg student. Talking about the impact of groups on memory, people have better memories for actions and events that they are personally connected to. Also, thinking about yourself when processing information prompts you to encode the information more deeply. And this is the self-reference effect. In other words, the self-reference effect is just the tendency for people to have better memories for actions and events that they are personally connected to in some way. The group reference effect, then, is the tendency for group members to have better memories for actions and events that are related to their group in some way. So, self-reference effect, you remember things better when you connect them to yourself. Group reference effect, you remember things better when you connect them to your group. Taken all together, groups provide an organizational framework to aid memory. Okay, we're almost done. It's on to biological theories. Group members are living creatures whose responses are often shaped by physiological, genetic, and neurological characteristics. Biological theories concern how our group behaviors may be predetermined by our biology and genetics. We may be hardwired to react in certain ways. Biological predispositions, then, are just the factors that we have inherited from the generations that came before us. The biopsychosocial threat challenge model, courtesy of James Blaskovich? Yes, James Blaskovich. Traces differences in group members' performance back to their physiological reactions to evaluation. So again, talking about physiological reactions. This is the biopsychosocial threat challenge model. The BPS threat challenge model suggests that groups that feel that their work is challenging respond differently in a physiological way than groups that feel threatened by the tasks that they are attempting. Because if it's a challenge, you can potentially overcome it. But if it's a threat, you are in imminent danger. Also, evolutionary theory, right? This focuses on aspects of humankind that aided our ancestors. Today, these aids are left over as residual tendencies, like, for example, strong emotional reactions like fight or flight that get activated in the face of final exams. And finally, we have our conclusion. Okay, these different theoretical perspectives are not mutually exclusive, meaning that you can pull from many different theories to explain group behaviors. Many of the greatest advances in understanding groups have occurred when two or more theories have been put together to form a new, more encompassing theoretical perspective. Okay, that is going to do it for the second chapter of group dynamics. Thank you all for watching. This has been Psych 361, Chapter 2.